Hello, Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. This lecture, we're going to build an Alexa skill, and this Alexa skill will basically read out our notes that we created in the last lab, build a serverless website using Poly. Now, this is completely optional. It's just a great way to have fun and get more hands-on with serverless. We're going to be using the serverless application repository. Before you can do this lecture, you will need to go to developer.amazon.com and sign up if you don't already have a developer account, and make sure you sign up with the same email address that you use for alexa.amazon.com. So your email address and password basically have to be the same as what you're using to log into your Alexa device, and then you'll be able to access your skills while they're in the development process immediately, so you don't have to go out and publish them in order to be able to access them. And if you do enjoy this lab and you want to make some more Alexa skills, check out our course on the A Cloud Guru platform. We go through and show you how to make 3 separate skills, and building Alexa skills is pretty much one of the funnest ways to learn how to program, because you're building something that's going to talk back to you and react to you. I have an awful lot of fun playing with Alexa. So if you've got the time, but once you've signed up to developer.amazon.com, please log into the AWS console and we'll get started. Okay, so I've logged into the AWS console. Just double check your region, make sure it is in Northern Virginia. And once you've done that, let's go over to services and we'll go over to Lambda and click in here. Now we're going to create our function, and this time we're going to use the serverless application repository. This is basically a whole bunch of pre-built applications that are free to use and to deploy, and you can go in and edit them. So if you type in Alexa in here, you'll be able to see a whole bunch of different Alexa skills. The one we want is the Alexa Skills Kit Node.js fact skill. So go ahead and click on that. And you will need to click on this GitHub URL that will open a new window for you. Go into models and then go into enus.json. And we will need this JSON a little bit later when we go and build our skill. But for now, just go back to your other tab and back into Lambda. And in here, we're going to name our application. So I'm going to call it My Alexa Skill. And we're going to go ahead and hit deploy. Now this is actually creating a CloudFormation template, and so it's really important to remember that when you go and once you finish this lab, you could just delete the Lambda function, but that won't remove it entirely. What you need to go and do is go into services and go down to CloudFormation, which is under management tools, so in here. And then if you do want to delete your skill, you will have to go and delete this CloudFormation template. So you just click in here and go delete. And for that reason, the name, you can see the name here, My Alexa Skill. If you were to try to use that name a second time, the CloudFormation template will fail because you'll have 2 stacks with the same name. So make sure the name's unique as well. So that is currently creating. Let's go back over to Lambda and have a quick look if this is ready yet. So here it is here. It is ready. My AWS serverless repository can take a couple of minutes. So if yours isn't there, just keep hitting refresh until you see it. And let's go in and have a look at this skill. So we've already got it all configured for us. It's got the Alexa Skills Kit as our trigger, got our code in here. And the great thing about this is we really don't need to know how to program whatsoever, but basically these are the variables that we're going to change. So the skill name is SpaceFacts. The get fact message, so when you say, Alexa, open SpaceFacts, she'll say, here's your fact, and then she'll pick one of these facts that completely randomly. So you can go in and change this. You can put your own notes. What we're actually going to do is go ahead and change it so that she is going to actually read out or actually stream our MP3 files from our S3 bucket using the Poly service. So Alexa will be streaming those MP3 files. So I'm going to leave everything as default right now. We don't need to save this. The one thing I would do is just go up here and get your ARN and copy that into your clipboard. So just copy that into your clipboard. And now what we need to do is go over to the developer.amazon.com portal. Okay, so I'm in developer.amazon.com. I'm going to click on Amazon Alexa. And then I'm just going to go over to my Alexa consoles and click on skills. And what we're going to do is create a new skill. So just click on create skills. You can see I've got 3 skills here from my other course. So go ahead and hit create skill. I'm going to call this My Poly Skill, something like that. Make sure you leave this as English US so that everyone has the same language. And then in here, we're just going to go in and click on custom as a select and go ahead and create our skill. Now our skills, this is where we go in and basically set everything up in our skill. Up here, you've got build. Once we've built it out, we then actually have to build the entire model. We can then go in and test. Now, if you go into the JSON, basically the JSON here defines everything under these intents. So what we're going to do is we just go back over to our GitHub, and we're going to take this JSON here, and this will basically configure our skills. So just copy that into your clipboard, go back over, paste it in here. And I'm just going to change the name. So the invocation name, this is the name that you say to invoke the skill. So right now it's SpaceFax, but that can be quite difficult to test because there is a real SpaceFax skill on the Alexa Marketplace. And sometimes you don't know if you're testing your own skill or if you're testing one that's already been published. So I'm just going to change this to my poly skill. So you can only have three words, by the way. And I'm going to leave everything else as default. In here are all our, this is our intent, and I'll cover that off in a second what that is, but just go ahead and save, and then go ahead and before we build the model, we just need to go over to our endpoint, and we need to tell it where our Lambda function is. So I'm going to say AWS Lambda ARN. I'm going to go over to Lambda. So I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard. I'm going to go back over to here and put it into my default region. So this is the default region when someone calls my skill. I'm going to click on Save Endpoints. You can see that it's been saved successfully. If we just click back over to our intents, we can now click over and build our model. Now this will take about 5 minutes, so I'm just going to pause the video while this builds, and then we'll go in and test it. Okay, my build has now been successful. If I go over to test, we will have to turn this on. And we just go here, test is disabled for this skill, so do turn it on. If you don't remember your invocation name, just go back over to build and just click on your invocation up here. So it's called my poly skill. And so in our test, we would just say open my poly skill. And so anything you type in here is testing on a real life, on an Alexa device. So you can actually open other skills as well. So my poly skill is a very unique name. So we can click in here and just hit enter, and we can test out what the results are.
The temperature inside the sun can reach 15 million degrees Celsius.
So this is the input here in JSON. This is the output here in JSON. So this is our Lambda function's output, and it's given us a random fact. So it's given us that this, what was it? The temperature inside the sun can reach 15 million degrees. So you can actually test this, like I said, other skills. You could say open a cloud guru, and you'll hear my voice, which is a bit scary.
Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and
There we
welcome
go.
back. To start, you can say what's new to hear the latest episode of AWS this week, or say quiz to test your AWS knowledge.
I don't know how well you can hear that, but we have an A Cloud Guru skill where you can listen to AWS this week, or you can just start practicing for your exams. So do check that out. Let's go back over to, let's configure this a little bit better. So we are going to go in and change our code, and we want it to stream what's in our MP3 inside our S3 bucket. So if we click on voice and tone, you'll be able to see SSML tags. If you click in here, you'll be able to see a whole bunch of different synthesis speech markup language. So you can teach Alexa how to whistle. You can teach her how to, not whistle, whisper. So you can see in here, I want to tell you a secret, I'm not a real human. If you copy and paste that into your clipboard and go back to the kit, you can actually just paste it directly in here, and you'll be able to hear her.
I want to tell you a secret. Can you believe it?
So you can test it out in there. What I would do is if you go back to this, you can go down to audio. So here is what we're going to do, is we're going to stream audio. Now, one thing to note is the audio file cannot be longer than 90 seconds. So if your notes go over 90 seconds, this won't work. But in order to stream audio, we could just cut and paste this. Let's do this as a whole thing. Go back over in here, and we're going to paste it in here and hit play.
Welcome to Carpool.
You
You can order a ride or request a fare estimate. Which will it be?
So let's delete this and delete this, and we will keep our audio source. So it's just audio source, but we're going to delete this this MP3. And all we want to do now is go over, let's go back over to our AWS console, and we'll go down to services, and we'll go over to S3, which is under storage, and just click in your Poly MP3 storage bucket, click on one of these ones randomly. So I'm going to grab this one, and so I'm going to copy and paste this link into my clipboard. Now I'm just going to go back over to where we were testing our things and just paste it in here, and you should, hopefully,
Learning AWS.
There you go. That's an MP3 file. Someone's learning AWS because I left this. I left my serverless website live over the weekend, and people have been creating their own MP3s. So I'm going to grab one that is actual notes. Let's see. Pretty sure this one's going to be someone's actual notes. Just copy the link in here. I'm just going to paste the new link in here and try that one.
With Lambda, you can run code for virtually any type of application or backend service, all with zero administration. Just upload your code
So
and
you can hear
Lambda
it going
takes care
there.
of everything required to run and scale your code with high availability. You
Great.
can set up your code
Okay,
to
that's
automatically
enough.
scale for modern.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard, and we'll just go back over to, well, let's just go back over to test and look at our Alexa simulator. So again, if we said open my poly skill and hit enter.
Here's your fact. A year on Mercury is just.
Okay, there's my fact. Now you can see in here that the output is already speak, and then it gives us our fact, and then end speak. And this is what our Lambda function does automatically for us. So if we were going to go and add this, we don't need the speak, end speak. We just need this that we just created. So we just need this link, audio source. So I'm going to grab that link, and I'm going to go back over to our S3, over to the AWS console. Let's go back into Lambda, and let's go make a change. So if we click in here, we can go in and we can change the code. So instead of saying here's your fact, we'll say here's your, let's say AWS fact. We might even want to do something like this. I haven't actually tested this before, but let's try that. So here's your AWS fact, and then we can scroll down. Here's all our data. So what we want to do is just remove this. Let me just go back. So what we want to do is remove this and just have, let's say, the one fact that we can try. And instead of saying a year on Mercury is just 88 days long, let's paste in our audio. So audio source, there we go. So here's your AWS fact, and there we go. It should hopefully work. So let's go ahead and hit save. That is now saving, and then let's go back over to our Alexa console, and if we just go back to the Alexa simulator, and again, just write in open my poly skill, and go ahead and just hit enter.
Here's your AWS fact. With Lambda.
And there we go. So she's now reading out our AWS facts. And so all you need to do is, as many facts as you have, you would go in and add that. So if you wanted to add another line, just copy and paste it. Make sure you include this comma at the end. And so just add in another MP3 file in there, and that will add in more and more facts. So I'm just going to delete this, and just want to show you that we can test this in real life. Before we do go and test it though, one other thing you should be aware of is if we just go over to our build phase, we can change the names. So we've got our get new fact intent, and in here, these are what we call utterances. So you're saying, ask my poly skill a fact, a space fact, tell me a fact, etc., etc. I don't really want space stuff in here because it's no longer a space skill. It is just a, it's AWS skill. So tell me space trivia, give me a trivia, give me some information, tell me something, give me something. So you can add in more that you want here. So tell me an AWS fact, something like that. So you can add in as many different utterances as you want, and utterance is simply the way of saying something. So give me a fact, give me a trivia, tell me trivia, etc. There's lots of different ways of saying the same thing, and the more utterances you have, the better it is, or the easier it is to invoke your skill. So that is all ready to go. Let's go ahead and test this in real life. And sorry, one last thing that I will tell you just before we test this. I was trying to test it in real life. It wasn't working. I thought it was the invocation name. I thought it wasn't picking up my poly skill. Actually, what the issue was that my Alexa was configured for the UK, and we built this out in the US. So I had to go into settings, and I had to find the Alexa that I'm using to test this. So my one was called Twickenham Ryan's office. We're based out in Twickenham in London. And I needed to go in here, and I needed to change her region from being UK based to US based, and then the skill will work. So your Alexa needs to be in the same region in which you configured the skill. So in here, to change the region, you just go down to language, and you change it to English United States. So that's the way you can test your skill. So long as this is English United States and you've deployed everything into US East 1, so into the Northern Virginia region, then everything should work. So now let's go ahead and test this. Okay, so we're ready to test this in real life. And to test it, all we need to do is say, Alexa, open my poly skill.
Here's your AWS fact. With Lambda, you can run code.
So it's now streaming our MP3 files straight from the cloud. Alexa, stop. So there you go. You now have the skills to create your own Alexa skill that will read out all your notes for your AWS exam, which you can put into the cloud using our serverless website that uses Poly. I will quickly show you how to quickly delete some records from DynamoDB and then how to go ahead and delete the skill once you're done. So let's go back to the AWS console. So I'm back in the AWS console. If I go over to services and go down to databases and click on DynamoDB, I'll have my DynamoDB database in here. The database is called Post, and in here are our different items. So if you do want to delete something, if something doesn't seem right, just click on it and go Actions and then hit Delete, and that will delete it from the DynamoDB database. You'll also need to go in and delete the MP3 file from your S3 bucket as well. So to do that, you just go over to Services, S3, and then go down to your MP3 file and then find the MP3 file that you don't want. So I definitely don't want that one, and I don't want that one. I go ahead and hit delete and delete. So that's how you manage things in and out of your serverless website. If you want to go ahead and delete your Lambda function, just go back over to Lambda. You could delete it here, but it was built using a CloudFormation template, so it is much better practice to go over to CloudFormation and delete it from there. So we just go to CloudFormation under Management Tools and just click in there and go delete stack. That will it will delete the stack as well as the Lambda function. And if you do try and use the serverless application repository and you keep getting error messages, chances are that you've used that stack before and you're using the same name, so you can't have two stacks with the same names. So just bear that in mind. Hopefully you had lots of fun and you've learnt an awful lot. Go ahead and build your own skills and impress your friends. And like I said, if you want to learn how to build even more skills, we go out and we build 3 skills in my Alexa course on the A Cloud Guru platform, so do check that out. So that's it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. So hopefully you're enjoying the course so far. You are a fair way into it by now and you are learning an awful lot about AWS. Hopefully you're enjoying it as well. I wanted to tell you about a competition we run every single week. It's called Guru of the Week. What we do is we post a professional level question, so a really, really hard question each week to our Facebook page. And what you can do is click through and go and answer that question on our discussion forums. Each week what we do is we choose one answer that's correct and also that has the best explanation as well. And what we do is we then send an exclusive t-shirt. So this is the t-shirt here. Seriously, I don't even own one of these. It's only for winners of Guru of the Week. You get a sticker and you get a hand-signed card by me. And you also go into the draw to win a free ticket to reInvent for 2018. This will give you lots of practice for answering professional level questions. So if you do want to go on and do your professional certifications, this is a great way to practice as well. And it's completely free to enter, and like I said, you can win really awesome prizes and a free ticket to reInvent 2018. So make sure you check it out. We announce the winner every single week on our weekly TV show AWS This Week. So that's it from me, guys. Keep being awesome. I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to the very last lecture in this section of the course. So this is the EC2 summary lecture. So congratulations, you when you first started this section, you might not have even have known what EC2 is. And now you've gone through and built your own serverless website. So we've gone from provisioning our own EC2 instances, putting them behind load balancers. We've looked at auto scaling groups. Then we've gone on to serverless, and we've built our own serverless websites that use Poly, and we've even built an Alexa skill. So hopefully you have learnt an awful lot in this section of the course, and hopefully you had a lot of fun as well. So let's move on to my exam tips. So going into the exam, you'll need to remember the different pricing models for EC2. So we had 4. We had on demand. This is where you pay either by the second or by the hour. We have spot. This is basically where you set a bid price, and if that spot price equals that bid price, your instances will be provisioned. As soon as the spot price goes over your bid price, your instances will terminate. remember that if that happens in an 1 hour period, or let's say 20 minutes, you won't be charged for that hour, but if you terminate the instances, then you will. We then have reserved. With reserved, this is where you reserve capacity. The contracts run from 12 months to 36 months, and the more you pay up front, the bigger discount that you get. And we then have dedicated hosts, and dedicated hosts are typically around licensing, or you could have issues where your regulator doesn't want you to use shared or multi-tenanted hardware. So those are the 4 different EC2 pricing models. And just remember with spot instances, like I said, if you terminate the instance, you pay for the hour, but if AWS terminates the spot instances, then you get the hour that it was terminated in for free. So that's important to remember going into the exam. We then have all our different instance types. We have FPGAs, we have high-speed storage, graphic intensive, high disk throughput, low-cost general purpose, dense storage, memory optimized, general purpose, compute optimized, graphics or general purpose GPUs, and memory optimized. Now, in the Solutions Architect Associate exam, you won't be necessarily expected to know all those instances. Certainly, if you go on to do the Solutions Architect Professional, you will have to have an idea as to what instance types actually exist and what don't. Don't worry too much about the numbers. If when you're watching this, there's now an F2 instead of an F1. Again, you won't ever be tested on that, but knowing the instance families does definitely help and will get you a few marks, certainly if you go on to do the Solutions Architect Professional or even SysOps Administrator. So how do we remember all those letters? Well, I want you to picture Edward Norton, and he wants to get into a fight with a Scottish duck who likes to hand out pictures of his homeland. So remember it this way: fight Dr. McPix. Fight Dr. McPix. I know that's ridiculous, but if you remember Edward Norton fighting a Scottish duck, you are going to remember every single one of those instances. Moving on to EBS. So EBS consists of SSD. So we've got 4 different types. So we've got SSD, general purpose GP2 is what it's called. And typically you'd use that up to when you need 10,000 IOPS. If we need faster performance than 10,000 IOPS, we've got SSD provisioned IOPS, and it's called IO1. We then have hard disk drive. This is throughput optimized. It's called ST1, and this is for frequently accessed workloads. We then have hard disk drive cold, which is SC1, and this is for less frequently accessed data. So it could be things for like a file server. Remember that the boot volumes can only be SSD general purpose or SSD provisioned IOPS. You can't have a boot volume using throughput optimized or using SC1, so hard disk drive cold. But you can use hard disk drive magnetic standard, and this is basically for cheap, infrequently accessed storage, but you can also have that as a bootable volume, and that's the only magnetic volume that is bootable. Also remember, you cannot mount one EBS volume to multiple EC2 instances. If you do need to share data between instances, you probably want to use EFS or maybe use S3 and attach a role to those instances so they can access that S3 bucket. So what do we learn in our EC2 labs? Well, we learned that termination protection is turned off by default. You must turn it on. So remember, it's off by default. And because of that, on an EBS BACS instance, the default action for the root EBS volume is to be deleted when the instance is terminated. So if you go in and terminate your EC2 instance, what's going to happen is it's going to terminate the EBS volume as well. With EBS BAC root volumes, they can now be encrypted using the AWS API or console. Basically, if you're doing it through the console, you provision your instance, you then go in and you take a snapshot of it, and then you deploy that snapshot again, and you click encrypt the volume. Or you could use third-party tools such as BitLocker to encrypt the root volume. It's entirely up to you as to whether or not which way you want to do it, but that can be a popular exam topic. So remember that you can use third-party tools such as BitLocker to encrypt your root volumes, and additional volumes can also be encrypted. Moving on to volumes versus snapshots. So volumes exist on EBS, and they're basically just a virtual hard disk in the cloud, whereas snapshots exist on S3. And you can take a snapshot of a volume, and this will basically store that volume on S3. As snapshots are basically point-in-time copies of volumes. Another important thing to remember is that snapshots are incremental. So this means that only the blocks that have changed since your last snapshot are moved to S3, and it's a way of saving storage. Now remember that if this is your first snapshot, it may take some time to create depending on the size of the volume. In terms of security, snapshots of encrypted volumes are encrypted automatically. Volumes restored from encrypted snapshots are encrypted automatically, and you can share snapshots, but only if they are unencrypted. And that's why when you go into provision a EC2 instance using the Amazon AMI, you can't actually encrypt it right from the get-go. You basically have to have an unencrypted root device volume when you provision it. You then go in and take a snapshot of that, and then you basically deploy that snapshot, and you can then encrypt the root device volumes. And then finally, these snapshots can be shared with other AWS accounts or made public, but only if they are unencrypted. Moving on to snapshots of root device volumes. So to create a snapshot for Amazon EBS volumes that serve as a root device volume, you should stop the instance before taking the snapshot. EBS versus instance store, this is a really important one to know going into your exam. So instance store volumes are sometimes called ephemeral storage, and instance store volumes cannot be stopped. If the underlying host fails, you are going to lose your data. With EBS back volumes, they can definitely be stopped. You're not going to lose the data on this instance if it is stopped, and you can reboot both and you will not lose your data. So they can try and trick you. Just remember, if you're going to stop an instance with EBS backed, you're not going to lose the data. With instance store volumes, you are, or with ephemeral storage, you are. Also remember that both root volumes, so root volumes just where you install your operating system, and whether it's EBS backed or instance store, they will both be deleted on termination. However, if you use EBS volumes, you can actually tell AWS to keep the root device volume. So you can go in and terminate the instance, but you'll still keep your root device volume, but only if it's EBS backed. So how can you take a snapshot of a RAID array? So the problem with taking snapshots is that it excludes data held in the cache by the application and the OS, and this tends not to matter on a single volume. However, using multiple volumes in a RAID array, this can be a problem due to interdependencies of the array. So the solution is to take an application consistent snapshot. So how do you do that? Essentially, all you have to do is stop the application from writing to disk, flush all caches to the disk, and then you're able to take a volume consistent snapshot. So you go in and take your snapshot and it'll be fine. So how do you do this? Well, you freeze the file system, you then unmount the RAID array, and you do this essentially by shutting down the associated EC2 instance. So basically shut down your EC2 instance, go in and then take a snapshot of your different EBS volumes that are set up in a RAID array. Moving on to Amazon machine images. So AMIs are regional. You can only launch an AMI from the region in which it is stored. You can, however, copy AMIs to other regions using the console command line or using the Amazon EC2 API. Moving on to monitoring. So by default, you've got your standard monitoring. It's every 5 minutes. If you want more refined monitoring, you've got detailed monitoring. It will be every 1 minute. That will cost you a little bit extra though. CloudWatch is used for performance monitoring. So things like CPU utilization, network throughput, disk utilization, etc. But if you want to do auditing, that's CloudTrail. So you turn CloudTrail on, and basically any API call or anything that you do inside the AWS console will be recorded in CloudTrail. And what they'll try and do is they'll try and trick you between CloudWatch and CloudTrail. Just remember that CloudWatch is for performance monitoring and CloudTrail is for auditing. Moving on, what can you do with CloudWatch? Well, there's 4 things. You've got dashboards. So CloudWatch basically helps you to create awesome dashboards to see what's happening within your AWS environment. You then have alarms. So you can set an alarm that notifies you when particular thresholds are hit. bit. So when we go and do the WordPress lab, we're going to look at CPU utilization of over 80%. That will trigger an alarm, which will then trigger some auto-scaling groups. We then have events. So CloudWatch events helps you to respond to state changes inside your AWS resources. And we do actually look at that in a lot more detail in the security specialty course, which is where we basically use CloudWatch events to trigger automated security responses. And then finally, we've got logs, and CloudWatch logs helps you aggregate, monitor, and store logs. And the cool thing about CloudWatch logs is you can actually send data from outside your AWS environment to CloudWatch logs as well. So it's not just AWS specific. Moving on to roles, it's really important to remember that they're far more secure than storing your access key ID and secret access key on individual EC2 instances, because if that instance is then compromised, obviously people have got the access key ID and secret access key. They'll be able to access your AWS resources from anywhere in the world. It's much easier to just give an EC2 instance a role, which allows it to access other services such as S3. Roles are also much easier to manage because if you are storing your access key ID and secret access key on, let's say, 1,000 EC2 instances, and that key does get compromised and you suddenly revoke the key and reissue a new one, you then have to go into 1,000 EC2 instances and update the access key ID and secret access key. One thing to note is that roles can be assigned to an EC2 instance after it has been provisioned using both the command line and the AWS console. That never used to be the case. It used to be a very popular exam question. You used to only be able to do it when you're provisioning an EC2 instance. That is no longer the case now. You can definitely assign and change a role to an EC2 instance after it's been commissioned. And roles are universal, so you can use them in any region. Basically, almost everything inside identity access management, such as users, groups, etc., is universal, so it's not region specific. Moving on to instance metadata, it's used to get information about an instance. So if you're looking for things like the public IP, you're going to use the curl http 169.254.169.254/latest/metadata. So metadata is data about the instance. You can also use 169.254, 169.254 to get user data, but anything to do with the actual instance itself, so things like its private IP, its public IP, its DNS name, etc. That'll all be using the metadata, so data about data. So just remember that going into your exam. Moving on to EFS, it supports the Network File System version 4, so it's NFS v4 protocol. You only pay for the storage that you use. There's no pre-provisioning required, and it can scale all the way up to the petabytes, so it is a really resilient service, and it can support thousands of concurrent NFS connections. So it's a great thing to use if you're going to need a file server where you've got thousands of people connecting into it. And data is stored across multiple availability zones within a region, so it is very resilient. And the consistency model for EFS is read after write. So as soon as you've written the data, you will then be able to go in and read that data. So what is Lambda? Lambda is a compute service where you can upload your code and create Lambda functions. It basically takes care of the provisioning and managing of servers that you use to run your code. You don't have to worry about operating systems, patching, scaling, etc. And you can use Lambda in the following ways. So you can have it as an event-driven compute service where Lambda runs your code in response to events. We saw that with the Alexa skill. Whenever you said Alexa, that basically triggers a Lambda function, and we were able to get Alexa to read out all of our, read out our notes that we made using the serverless website that uses Poly. And you can also use it as a compute service to run your code in response to HTTP requests using Amazon API Gateway or API calls made using the AWS SDKs. And that's exactly what we do at A Cloud Guru. And you did exactly that when we created our serverless website that uses Poly. And then placement groups, remember right now there is two types of placement groups, clustered placement groups and spread placement groups. If you do see the word placement group used in the exam and it doesn't say whether it's clustered or spread, work on the assumption that it's clustered. Clustered placement groups essentially mean that it's always going to be in one availability zone. And it's used for big data. It's used for things with like low latency and high network throughput. Whereas spread placement groups is where you've got like really important EC2 instances, and you want them on individual pieces of hardware. You don't want your critical EC2 instances to be on the same hardware. So by using a spread placement group, you essentially are guaranteeing that they are in separate pieces of hardware. So congratulations, you are at the end of the EC2 section. Hopefully you've learnt an awful lot. To be honest, EC2 makes up such a huge component of the exam. You're probably halfway there to passing your exam already, maybe even a little bit more. Certainly with EC2 and S3, you're probably actually 75% on the way to passing your exam. So that is it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next section. Thank you.